Hey y'all, this is Lori Jennings. I'm the founder of Jennings Pro Search, an executive IT recruiting firm headquartered here in Richmond, Virginia. I help place senior technical to executive leaders um, in the tech space. People like my guest today, who's a former chief information security officer, we call them CISOs, who's now an industry advisor for a tech company. And she's here today to talk about layoffs as it relates to what's in general, but we're going to dig into the cybersecurity space. We're going to hear her thoughts on what's going on in that space specifically, and whether we're going to talk about how to do layoffs. If you are laid off, some advice. So I'm excited to have Lalisha Hurt here. She's my friend. We met, I guess, during COVID when you came on a podcast I was doing at RVA Tech to talk about leveling up careers. And since that time, we've been on the board of RVA Tech. We've been in Women in Tech events. You've been the recipient of the Women of the Year Award, which is given, it's the highest award we give each year in the Richmond community for people that not only exemplify great leadership skills, but give back. And I think that's what I've always noticed about you since I met you and followed you. You're constantly giving back. You're out there giving advice. You're trying to get people in the industry, and I really respect that about you. So welcome, Alicia.
Thank you so much. You make me seem like such a great, loving, warm person that's advocating for everyone.
Well, you are.
I appreciate that.
Why don't you start off by giving us a little background about you? Yeah.
So first and foremost, thank you for having me here on the one and only Mike King Biz Radio Show. So a little bit about myself. I am a native of Richmond. I lived here probably most of all of my life, with the exception of a small stint in New York, and I went away to Charlottesville for school. Go Cavaliers! But background from an academic perspective, a little bit of engineering, a little bit of business, sprinkled with some information assurance. So pretty unique, but I did start my career in governance, risk, and compliance at one of our U.S. Central banks here locally in Richmond. And so I dabbled a little bit into auditing, consulting, across various industries over the last 20 years. But currently, as you mentioned, in my role today, I provide thought leadership, business strategy, and executive advisory support to C-level folks. And so on the side, when I'm not busy, I actually do real estate investment in building homes as well in my downtime.
I didn't know that about you.
Fun fact.
There you go. I had to get you on the show to find that out. Well, I guess, we're both experiencing and talking to a lot of candidates who unfortunately have been impacted by layoffs this year. It's a tough time. And I have total empathy. Back in, I guess, the turn of the century, sounds so
Not that long ago,
a decade. No, back in 2001, 2002, when I was working for tech companies in the .com, I was laid off twice in 6 months. And I'm seeing that with some candidates now. You had people that were affected early on. They got laid off. They went and found a new job. And then 6 months later, here they are again, because we see a slowdown in people hiring, a lot more competition for jobs. Now, have you ever been laid off or had to lay off anybody?
Yeah, well, yes and no. So I will say, .com, let me first say that was a very tough time for a lot of folks. I'm sorry to hear you were impacted. But I also remember during that time, it was when companies were offering students out of college jobs, but then rescinding them. And so that was a tough time for just like early professionals. So to answer your question, full disclosure and for the record, I have not been laid off. However, I have been on the receiving end of the phone calls, the emails, the messages from family, friends, and network, as I'm sure you have, right? Trying to walk through the process of how to recover. I also have been at the table in past companies where we've had to discuss layoffs as a part of mergers and acquisitions and divestitures. So I kind of have the behind the scenes of the why and the how and kind of how to go about doing that. And so not laid off per se, but I do definitely understand the impacts and all of the emotions, right, that go with that.
Okay. Well, what is your view on layoffs, and what do you think's driving all these layoffs in the tech industry right now?
Yeah, so can I first say I hate the term layoff?
Yeah.
I prefer the word separation, right? And I say that because layoff means to discharge a worker or a group of workers because of economic conditions or because shortage of work. And I think, as you said, and we've seen this in the tech industry, there's a lot more that's happening beyond just those two things. So I like to use the word separation. But like I think we're seeing, restructuring of organizations where they're consolidating departments and removing roles. We've seen during the pandemic where companies are struggling to recover, right, from a financial perspective, whether it's decrease in revenues and profits. I think during the pandemic, some companies probably overstaffed, overhired, right? And so now we're starting to see them right size the organizations and even outsource them in some cases, which is unfortunate. But I think another reason is my particular experience is with mergers, acquisitions, companies combining, companies divesting. And so I'll just share a personal, experience that I've had where I was responsible for leading the acquisition for two large companies from a cyber perspective. And so, as you can imagine, you got two separate companies, two different companies with two identical cyber departments, right? So, making that difficult decision to consolidate, right, and remove duplicate roles, right? I didn't necessarily need two SOC managers. However, I may needed that person in a different role in a different area because of the skill set that they have. So that was, I will say, difficult for me, having to navigate the process, the strategy, and then delivering the news to those folks.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this too. We're hearing some crazy ways people are laid off right now. Some things that are maybe the right way, some that aren't the right way. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what people that are out there that may have to go through, they might have to lay people off. People that are listening, give them some advice on that. Like, what are your
Yeah, I
the right
definitely
way? Yeah.
despite what people say. And so for me, I equate like layoffs and separations to breakup, right? That's something we all can identify with, whether it's friendships, whether it's marriage, whether it's partnerships, and even employment, right? There's a
Mhm.
good way and a bad way to do that, right? Wrong way to do that is like ghosting, right?
Oh yeah.
So, so like limited to no communication, no explanation of why this is happening, right? Sometimes there's public humiliation, like there's a lot of things that go along with that. And so I will share, Lori, and I'm sure you've heard similar stories, but I have people in my network who logged in on a Monday and found out that they no longer had access, right? I know of individuals who found out before the company notified them. They had a friend email them over the weekend and they reached out and said, hey, your email bounced back. What's going on? And that's how they found out. And then the last group of people is like leaders, right? And this is unfortunate. I had an individual in my network said, hey, Alicia, I didn't find out that my employee was gone until they didn't show up for a Zoom one-on-one meeting, right? That is the wrong way,
Yeah.
right? No one wants to break up or separate in that way. And so I think good looks like the opposite, right? Leading with empathy and care, providing advance notice when you can, being honest and open in your communications, and then providing the resources and support that not only those people need, but think about the people that are remaining in that organization. They need support and resources as well to be able to manage all of that from a morale perspective, from a culture perspective. And I'll share something from my past that I used to do. So when I would bring my little folding chair to the table of these conversations in my past organizations, I would ask them to do one thing, and I'm going to ask you to do it too. I'm going to put you on the spot, Lori, if you're okay with it.
Okay, go ahead.
I would say close your eyes or not, and imagine you have to lay yourself off. What does that look like? You're actually closing your eyes.
I am closing my eyes. You asked me to close my eyes. I was seeing if it would give me some clarity. You put me on the
It's a
spot.
big question though,
Yeah,
but right.
Yeah, I need some time, but I think having been laid off, you definitely want empathy. You want
Yeah,
somebody that's going to sit there and and have a conversation with you and set it up and maybe
yeah,
be honest about what's going on with the company, why you're having to go through layoffs, you know, versus just ghosting you. Just same thing in any type of breakup. I love how you talked about that separation because it's true.
it's
Think
very
about the
true.
breakups that you like. They
Yeah,
talk to you, they give you respect, they don't just ghost you or
yeah,
whatever. And so, yeah, I would be filled with that type of empathy and definitely be a conversation. Who knows?
Yeah.
You
So
know?
you're spot on. So you'd be surprised what people wrote down on stickies. And then I would ask them another question and say, and I won't ask you to answer, this is rhetorical, but I would say, hey, if you had to lay off your spouse, your child, your sibling, would you have the same response or would it be different? And so people would write things down. And I think my favorite one, and we would put them on the whiteboard and we would talk about like how we're going to do it, what's the best strategy to put it together. And I think the best response that I got from someone that led us to a totally different outcome was I wouldn't lay myself off. So that created conversations of, well, why wouldn't you lay yourself off? Right? Oh,
Mhm.
because I have different experiences over here. So I would actually put myself over in this role, right?
Mhm.
So maybe we don't need to lay everyone off. Maybe we need to look over here and see what open roles we have. And as opposed to laying them off, maybe we slot them over here because they have different skill sets that I didn't know Lori had, right?
Yeah.
So it led us down a different path of just like putting names on the list and saying, hey, we're going to let these people go. It created that conversation discussion around how we're going to do it, what's the right approach. And it led us completely different than what we started. So, highly recommend that to folks that may have to do that unfortunate, difficult decision.
That's great. All right. Well, thanks for that insight. Now we're gonna flip the switch a little bit. And on this show, I've been giving job search strategies.
Yeah,
Because right now, a lot of people looking for jobs,
that is true.
very competitive, getting 400, 600 applicants per role.
That's a
In
lot.
some cases, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity, I have a cybersecurity role right now. I got 400 applications
For one role.
for one role.
What role is it?
It's for a cloud cybersecurity engineer. And very few people actually have the skill set I'm looking for, but they're applying because it's very specific
Interesting.
to a specific type of cloud engineering role. Azure, if you know anybody.
Yeah.
That's why you're asking me.
Yeah.
That's right. Why you're doing it. And it's right here in Richmond, but it can be remote.
Nice.
So let's start with I've been given broad. Talk about cybersecurity. If anybody does find themselves separated or impacted,
Yeah.
or maybe they're just looking for a job for whatever reason,
Yeah.
they're going through a lot of pain. And I'm seeing this too. After people give layoffs, you mentioned it, morale's really low at those companies. A lot of the people start looking because I'm talking to people saying, I don't like the way they handled it. And or they're laying off high performers right now. So
Yeah.
I'm scared. I need stability where I am in my life. And so they're looking.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for these people?
So yeah, first and foremost, I'll say before I go into the technical and the resources and all the things that I've seen work for folks, I would say just being a human being first, like process your emotions. Because what I'm seeing and observing is it's a big gut punch when you get
Mhm.
that news. So make sure you're allowing yourself time to process what happened. Make sure you're reviewing your separation papers to see like what you actually have versus what you don't. I was talking to a young lady that, she was distraught, trying to manage all this stuff, not sure what she's going to do. And when we reviewed her separation papers, surprisingly, her company offered her a year severance,
Whoa.
6 months benefits, right?
Yeah.
Game changer, right? So what did she do? She took some time off. She, focused on her mental health, her family. She didn't like jump right back in there because she had a little bit of cushion. So I would say just make sure you understand your current state, review those papers, ask questions because there's a lot buried in there that you may not know you have access to. So once you've gotten through that, being a human being, right, and
Yeah.
just acknowledging where you are, your emotions, processing, I would say cybersecurity professionals in general have an advantage, right? It's a hot commodity skill set.
Mhm.
The downside is it's in demand and everyone's kind of competing for those same roles. Like you said, you got like a zillion applicants for one role. But what I like to tell people is make sure you have your resume updated, your LinkedIn presence already ready to go. Don't wait until you have to look, right? You know where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Don't wait until you're in a bind and you have to look for these roles. My friends joke with me and they laugh and they say, you move around quite a bit, which I do because I view employment as dating, right? And if it's no longer serving me, I move on. But what I do is when I go to my next job, I update my resume right away. I'm in a
Mhm.
good place. I got space. You never know what's going to happen. Last time I checked, Virginia's at will state. So they can separate me at any time. I can separate from them. And so you have to stay ready before you have to truly get ready, right? So that's the one thing I would say, and I don't know that we do that enough in the field is as you get these certifications, training, development, all these great things you're doing, make sure you're keeping an inventory of that and storing it so that you don't have to like remember all the great things that you've been doing before you go into the market. So
That's a good point, especially before you've been laid off and then you're
yeah,
emotionally, you're feeling wounded a little
yeah,
bit. Sometimes there's some shame and you may
yeah,
not be as confident in
yeah.
writing and keeping that updated as you would when you got that
Correct. So my
other
friends
state. Yeah.
laugh at me and now they're like, actually, that comes in handy now for
Mhm.
people. Second thing I would say is, there's a bunch of things I would say. Second thing I would say, networking, the power of networking. So there's a quote that I like by Ethel Barrymore that says, the time to make friends is before you need them, right? And so don't wait to until you're in a situation to reach out and start building relationships with Lori or Alicia. You should already been fostering and building these relationships. Don't be ashamed to put out on LinkedIn that you are open to work. That is
Right.
the way I know. Communicate with your network so that we can help you. That is one of the biggest things that I've been applauding people, right, on LinkedIn. Before, people wouldn't share that stuff publicly as much.
No, there was a lot of shame associated with this and they would keep it to themselves.
Yeah, so share, right? In order
Shame.
for me to know, because I don't know, you're a recruiter, I'm not, but I imagine when you're searching, right, or
Mhm.
looking, you look for maybe open to work or you look for those people that have been impacted and stuff like that. So don't underestimate the power of sharing and tapping into your network and your connections, because I've seen a lot of job offers happen
Yeah.
through somebody that Lori knows, somebody that Mike knows, somebody, and so connecting people with those roles and jobs, I say is key. And I would just say keep sharpening your skills, make sure you're in those, cyber professional conferences, summits, and all of those things that, could lead to opportunities, right? And making sure that you're visible. There's probably other things that I would say, but what would your viewpoint be?
Well, I think I want to go back to that comment about saying you're open to work because there's been a lot of controversy on LinkedIn conversations. You've got these people out there, these coaches, career coaches and stuff, and a lot of them, or not a lot, but some of them are saying, don't put your open to work. That shows that you're desperate. And I would say absolutely not. I think that advice is terrible. And it makes me mad when I'm reading that right now. And
Yeah.
there's a whole, I don't know if you've seen these
I
conversations
don't
going on
know, but I
LinkedIn.
wouldn't be surprised. I try to stay out of the back and forth, but I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised,
So it's
right?
going to be confusing for candidates who may, especially if they haven't looked for a job in a long time. Because some people do still stay at their job for, before COVID, and things have changed dramatically since COVID with the way we're hiring. I'd say, I just want people to know, as a recruiter, we absolutely look for
Good.
people that are low hanging fruit, that have that open to work if they have the skill set we're looking for.
Yeah.
So you've got to update it. You've got to make sure you're not being generic. When you put cybersecurity engineer, I need to see what kind of cybersecurity engineer.
Yeah.
If you've got clouds, experience, I want to see that you've got Azure or AWS or Google, whatever. I need the specifics because we are
Mhm.
looking with search strings and we need to find you. And when you're generic, we can't find you.
Yeah.
So update those.
Good. I'm
It's
glad I'm
really,
in
really
alignment with
important.
the expert
No,
because
yes.
I mean, just for me to be able to connect someone to say, hey, I know XYZ was laid off. I know their skill sets. Some of these people work for me. So I know them, their skill sets,
Yes.
and I can immediately say, hey, this person is hiring. This would be a good fit for you. But if I don't know you were laid off or I don't see open to work, I wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. And you're
Yeah.
assuming they're still there. They're in this great job. They're
Yeah.
not going to be interested. And you kind of want to help the people that are looking. Why
Right.
would you hire somebody that already has a job? You're like, let's look at the other ones
Correct.
first. This is a human. So I agree. And I think you got to stand out right now. And I've talked about this a lot versus I see some people that don't spend that time to update. They haven't updated yet. They're applying to all these jobs through the quick application button or whatever, quick apply button. And it's just not speaking, I can't see anything when I see it. And I
Mhm.
go on there and I'm like, oh my gosh, versus I get one and I get an application and the person's on there, they've done a video, they've made a
Mm.
post that says, hey, I really need your help. And they tell a personal story about how they were impacted and what this means to their family.
Mm.
And I think that people start to gather on and tell them about jobs. And I think that's what you really have to do. You have to get outside. You've got to put your sales hat
Yeah.
on. I know it's uncomfortable for people, cybersecurity folks. Some of them tend to be introverted. They may not be the ones that are out there in that sales role, but you got to force yourself to do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm pushing this big time, but that's really the way. And going out to conferences
Yeah.
and going to a networking events and talking to people because a lot of these jobs they're not posted.
Yeah.
And you're going to get hired and you're never going to look at those job postings or those applicants. If you find somebody that impresses you in
Yeah.
person,
Yeah, I agree. Well said from the recruiter. I mean, I think that's great advice, and I'll share as a final thought and just making this real is that, and I'll put a plug for Richmond Technology Council. So I actually hired my deputy CISO from a Women in Tech event at RVA Tech, and she has gone on to bigger and better roles. She's been successor. She's in another company, but like that's how I hired my
Yeah,
deputy CISO at a former company. And so I think there's value in making sure you're getting out, make sure you're connecting with your local, councils and chapters and going to these meetups because that is where job interviews are happening.
that's
That is
right.
where offers are being handed out, whether you know
Yeah.
it or not. So that will be my final parting note.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate all your time today. Tell everybody how they can find you, Lily. Are you on LinkedIn if
I
anybody
am
wants to
on
connect?
LinkedIn. I am the only Lalisha Hurt on LinkedIn. So LALISHA and last name is Hurt, HURT. I am excited to, network, connect, and help anyone that is, open to work and connecting them with roles. It's a passion, and especially if you're in cybersecurity.
Mhm.
Would love to hear from you. So I appreciate you having me, Lori.
Oh, thank you. And this is Lori Jennings again, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Lori Jennings, Lori, Jennings with a J, or on my website, jenningsprosearch.com. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.